Good afternoon. I'm Sarah Wijns. I'm the director of the Middelheimmuseum in Antwerp, and I warmly welcome you to the book launch of our Congoville publication this afternoon. I have the pleasure of introducing you to the moderator of this book launch, this conversation, and also the driving force behind the book that we made together. Pieter Boons has been trained as an architect, but quickly has made the transfer to the world of contemporary art. And in the Middelheimmuseum, over the last few years, I've had the pleasure of making dozens of exhibitions with him together, projects such as the one by Kader Attia, Andrea Zittel, Richard Deacon, very often collaborating together on new works together with these artists. For the last few years, Pieter has been, without much noise, radically putting the work of women artists at the forefront of the exhibition program and the acquisition policy of the museum. And so I'm very curious of where you will lead us this afternoon in the conversation with our guests. Pieter?
Hello, welcome at the book launch of the Congoville publication, the book we made together with the Leuven University Press, and that is accompanying the exhibition that Sandrine Colard, amongst us, curated for the Middelheimmuseum. My name is Pieter Boons. I'm the curator of the museum and I'm the editor of this book. And I would like to welcome the panel that we have invited for today very warmly. The first question actually is a bit of an introductory question. I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself and also to reflect on the location where we are, because we're quite in a specific location, isn't it, Bas?
Yes. Hi, my name is Bas De Roo. I'm an historian at Geheugencollectief, which is an independent research center. And what I think about this place, for me, it's a perfect example of how Belgian society deals with its colonial past. So there's thousands of people who walk past this building every day, maybe every week. But many people don't know this place. They don't know that it used to be a colonial college that used to teach white students that they were superior and that therefore they had the moral obligation to go to Congo and civilize the so-called primitive peoples who lived there. And so for me, this is a perfect example of how we're not really dealing with our colonial past and its legacies. It's just, it remains unknown, but still it's there, it's still here, this building still exists. So that's what this place represents for me.
Thank you. Our next guest is Sandrine Colard, who is the curator of the exhibition. Sandrine, can you tell us something that we don't know already?
About me?
About yourself?
There's a lot. Well, I'm a curator, as you said. I'm an independent curator of Congoville. I'm a writer, a researcher, and I'm also a professor of African art history at Rutgers University in New York. But I'm Belgian Congolese. I was born and raised in Brussels, and happily coming back. Regarding your question about the sort of relationship or engagement that I could have with this room, I think that Bas has said a lot of what we all think, that it's really something that illustrates very vividly and very vividly how we cohabit in this country with the colonial past, that it's around us, very much there, very big, but we barely talk about it. And also, it's for me, it's also very interesting because when we speak about colonialism or the consequences that we could still feel today, you know, it feels like this very diffuse spirit that some people had, but that we are free from. And I think that it's interesting to sit in the room where colonialism was actually taught. You know, there was a curriculum built around it, and that we were shaping the mind of young people into becoming colonial administrators, going to, as Bas said, you know, civilized people. And so we see that it's something that was very tangible, and that unless we make the work of talking about this and actively deconstruct it, it's going to stay there. So this is the sort of importance that I see in sitting all together here today.
Thank you, Sandrine. Welcome also Aminata Ndo. Can you please say us something about yourself?
Yes, so I'm also a historian. I actually studied at the University of Antwerp history here, and so my relationship to this place, I haven't actually been here, and I only found out about it the recent past. But I think it all comes together nicely because out of the experience of studying history at the University of Antwerp, experiencing it very much as a white institution, as a being the only Black person in a white space, which inspired me together with my two friends to start a African Student Union at the university, and then together with Mohammed to start Black History Month. So I think it's all about the feelings that we have of discomfort in these educational spaces, feelings of belonging and not belonging, or absences and presences, and things that are said and are not said, that really inspired us to work with that. So yeah, being here now and finding out as well from all of you the different stories that are attached to this place really makes me think about it again, and it's a strange experience to be here. But,
in the preparatory discussion we had, Aminata, you were interested to being the respondent in this discussion, following the quotes or selected quotes by the author. So we have 4 main essays in the book. Two of the authors, Sandrine Colard, Bas De Roo, they are present here, so they could choose and speak about their own quotes. And following the quotes, we try to talk about accessibility. Aminata, can you briefly tell us what the idea was of going for quotes and the theme of accessibility in terms of Black History Month and the things you do there? Yeah.
So I think a lot of times you have interesting publications, arts, exhibitions that I think could be very important for African descendant people here in Belgium to engage with. But it's really about finding a way of giving them already a snippet of what it's about, but in a way that it speaks to them, and I guess triggers them to want to know more and to want to read more and to feel like it's not just because I think with a lot of Black people, especially in Belgium, when we're talking about like colonialism and especially from a very research based perspective, they feel still very disengaged from it, and I think it's important to communicate to people that this information that is out there, these ways of thinking and talking and writing about it or creating art about it is something that is also close to them, and something that is interesting to explore from a personal and a collective perspective for us all to work with. So I think working with quotes for me was interesting because having a quote, it's just a sentence of two that says something about the text, can really bring people to want to read more about it, maybe, or and even if they don't, and maybe the quote in itself does share something already of what is written.
Thanks. I'm also wondering, because we're not only combining several authors, but also several artists, so it's and an academic publication, and there are artistic contributions. So in a way, there's a big polyphony in this book present. So in terms of access, I'm also interested to know, how can we read a polyphonous book? How can we engage with all these voices who all speak about Congoville in their own way? But I think let's start with the beginning. The first idea or the first act we did was inviting, as the Middelheimmuseum Bas De Roo, historian amongst us. Your text was the first text or project that we had to invite Sandrine and the artists and to start thinking about the possibility of a project. This text is also published in the book. It's been 3 years since you first did your research. How do you look back at this period, Bas, from then until now?
Well, I have to say that actually, I was thinking about this question earlier. Actually, I kind of have the feeling that a lot has changed. It has only been 3 years, but I think it's probably because there was the 60-year anniversary of independence that a lot of things started moving in a way. Because the Middelheimmuseum isn't the only museum who actually did something about colonial independence, colonial history, and colonial legacies. And I've noticed that in my own professional life, but also in my personal life, because like I work for Eigen Collectief, and we had multiple projects about colonial history, about colonial legacies, other museums, local governments that contacted us. So plenty of people actually wanted to do something with this history. And I think that's something new. Used to be just the Africa Museum in Tervuren, but now there's just different institutions that are willing to deal with their own colonial history or just colonial history in general. But I think what's even more interesting is that also on a personal level, I see a lot of friends who are now aware of the whole decolonization movement. They know what decolonization means, or at least they kind of understand it. They know the word and they know that it's important, and they also know things like white privilege. And I think that's very important. So I do see things moving in the right direction. That being said, I do think that there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. And I still think that if you compare it, for example, to the time and means that are being invested today, for example, in the remembering of this Flemish nationalist past, and if you compare it to then the means and the time that are being invested at the moment in the remembering of this Belgian colonial trauma, then I do think that, it deserves more attention still. And there's still a lot of work to be done. But at least in these 3 years, I've seen things move quite rapidly, actually.
Do you feel you're a different researcher than 3 years ago?
Yeah, definitely. Because I used to, when I did my PhD, I only focused on colonial practice in Congo. And that's the only thing I focused on. And then by doing this project, but also by doing other projects, I just realized that the city I live in is just a colonial city, and that places like the Colonial College are just, this is just one colonial place in Antwerp, and it's literally everywhere. Once you start looking, and once you know where to look, you just see it everywhere. And that makes it very confronting, because then I always have this feeling like the city of Antwerp, for example, should do more to make people aware of all these colonial places, of all these colonial stories, and especially of all these colonial legacies that are still living on today. Like a lot of white people still think that unconsciously, in a way, they still think that they're at the center of the universe, and they still feel this, they still have these feelings of superiority, and they still look at people who are not white in stereotypical ways. And they need to be made aware of that, and they need to understand where that way of thinking comes from. And I think that's why projects like this are so important, because you actually confront people with colonial history and colonial legacies right in the place where it happened. So I think,
yeah. Maybe let's look at your quotes. What quote did you select? Can you read it for us?
Yeah, it's actually, I think it's the last sentence in my contribution. Today, more than 60 years after the end to the Belgian colonization of Congo, Rwanda, and Burundi, the Colonial College and the civilizing myth that the Institute taught still live on. And I think I wanted to end my contribution with this sentence, because for me, that's what Congoville is all about. It's about having a critical look at this place, at this important place in Belgian colonial history. And I think it's important because when you look at the history, then you understand its legacies. And I just explained to you like this idea that for some reason white people are superior, and that we therefore have the obligation to help, for example, the poor African people, or develop Africa. You can, there's different ways of talking about it. But I think in a way, it's not a good way of looking at the world. I think we need to get past that. And then that's why I wanted to end with this quote. I think people need to be made aware of the fact that we still think in colonial way. We still think in and we, with me, I mean white Belgians, most of them, still think in very colonial ways. And I don't know, in my opinion, there's no room for that kind of perspective, especially in a place like Antwerp, where you have people with so many different origins living together, because it always leads to discrimination or stereotypical views of other people, and that's just not a good thing. So I think we need to move past that.
Yeah.
So that's what that quote is all about.
I'm interested in Sandrine's reaction, but maybe, Aminata, is it now a good idea to respond, because you were responding to all quotes?
Yes, I don't know if it's better for Sandrine to respond first, or maybe Sandrine can
What you prefer?
Maybe Sandrine can respond
Okay.
to it, and then I will.
Can you remind me the question, the initial question?
What I would like you to hear, to resume, Bas has actually, one of the motivations, if I get it right, is that you still feel that the seeds that were planted in institutions like this are still growing, or unfortunately are still there, the plants that they erected. So that's the reason why you wanted to also highlight this at the end of your essay. Is that also one of the reasons why, as a curator, you wanted to tackle this history?
Well, I'm like Bas, I have an academic background. I also teach in a university, and it's interesting because, especially in Belgium, for actually years, historians have worked on the colonial question, but it has never trickled down into society. And there's a reason why it's called the ivory tower, academia. And so every time you have this sort of dissonance between historians in Belgium saying, but we've worked on these questions, but it has never translated into history classes for schools, actions, thinking about what's the relationship between this research. And so for me, this is the important thing about this project. It's that it's really trying to bring this to awareness, to the awareness of general society. And I think the work that Aminata is doing, the work that the museum has been doing to really try to get as large a spectrum as visitors as possible is really important, because we have many tools actually to tackle these questions. But because it has been deemed as not a priority for so long, they have been laid to rest. We have not been using them. And it's interesting, I was listening to Bas and saying that, of course, in 3 years things have changed a lot. I'm not so sure I would credit that only to the 60th anniversary of independence, because as long as I can recall, each time there's an additional decade, there's some sort of festivity that usually try to leave all the tricky questions on the side. We just focus on the festive aspect of it. And I think we really need to address the fact that Black Lives Matter has made a world of difference, and that these, the sort of awareness or realization that people have that this is not the past, people still very much live in the consequences of that past, have been brought to awareness because of that movement. I think it was a couple of years ago, the United Nations produced a report about the situation of Belgium, of discrimination and racism in Belgium, and people were appalled. They could not believe it, because, we very often hear the same people talking about these questions. And so the fact that, that's what I mean when it has not trickled down into society, is that we have these different realms. We have academic work, we have society, and we have school education, and it's like all these different entities have actually never come together to change things. And I think that the big difference that's happening since last year is that people realize that it needs to translate into real changes in society, into actions, which is something that up until recently was stayed at the level of discourse. And that's really what I hope we can achieve with this exhibition. It's just one stone to a very large edifice, but I really hope that by having this polyphony we're talking about, having different voices, different audiences, going from the academia to trying to get school to come, to try to maybe dream to actually change the education system in Belgium, is all these different aspects that hopefully will finally bring some changes.
Okay, thank you. I hear tackling down into society, action. Maybe this is a step to hear Aminata, because I think as I see all the activities that like Black History Month is organizing, it's becoming something that you cannot avoid.
Yes.
How do you see that?
Yeah, I think like what Sandrine said was very interesting about how it's about the fact that it's this colonial presence as well. It's like it's present now, even though it links back to the past. And I think that is also like, maybe to preface my response, which I try to write down my thoughts about it. But for me, that is what stood out when I read the book, this idea that that the past, you know, this relationship between like the past and the present, and then as well the future, and how those work together, and especially for Black people here, how do they relate to the past and the colonial past, living in this present where there's still a lot of racism, both institutional, structural racism that you deal with, but also still interpersonal racism. So yeah, as a person of African descent who graduated with a bachelor's of history in from the University of Antwerp, I think the quote from Bas resonates with me. I guess finding out the history of this colonial institute that we're finding ourselves in now confirms in a way this eerie experience of studying as a person of color in a predominantly white institution. And I think something that came up a few times in some of the essays, the fact that the colonial house in a way is always haunted. And I therefore thought it was instructive, I guess, to approach this exhibition, but also the essays in the book in light of the philosopher Jacques Derrida's concept of hauntology. And I've always been fascinated by that since I found out about it during my studies. And it's a concept he developed in response to the collapse of the Soviet Union and the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. And so reflecting on Karl Marx's idea of communism as a specter, as a ghost, as a presence that is that haunts Europe. Derrida, in turn, explores the specters, so the ghosts of Marx that haunt worlds after the victory of capitalism, you could say, which was supposed to bring about the end of history. Now, so Derrida in Spectres of Marx was inspired by Hamlet, Shakespeare's Hamlet, and in which he evokes the ghost of old Hamlet, who persistently returns to expose past crimes and injustices, and to urge his son to take retributive action. So this specter, this ghost, is conceptualized as the embodiment of a spirit that is not honored, and I think this that really is this memory, this of colonialism that is everywhere and nowhere, I guess, but it's felt. So yeah, what this concept of, for me, like hauntology and this idea of engaging with ghosts and ghosts of the past, it meddles, I guess, with time and with time's arrow. It's like it points back to past injustices and unresolved problems that in a way refuse to stay relegated to the past, that become very present, that we experience now. So yeah, I think that is also how I feel about this whole civilization myth. It goes back to the past. It's been taught in this space that we are now, but it still haunts us. Still is present day. It haunts us all, and even if it's not that clear, we can feel it's there, even if we can name it. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think that's.
Do you think we can chase ghosts that are appearing in spaces like where we are now?
I think it's really about engaging with them. Indeed, it's. I don't know if it's if we should chase them, but I think we should learn how to live with them and to listen to. Not just to listen to the ghosts, but also to listen to the people who are being haunted by those ghosts, both the ones that are more related, I guess, to perpetrators as to victims, or if you would use those words. Yeah.
And ghosts are usually, emanation of something that have not been put to rest properly.
Yeah.
Once we actually do that work, we may not have to deal with ghosts anymore.
Yes. Yeah.
It reminds me, Sandrine, of your definition of Congoville. You have a definition, if I may. It's the collection of the visible and the invisible traces of the colonial past in Belgium. Did you encounter haunted stories, ideas, hauntology when you were first visiting the site here? How do you see this?
Well, this school is impressive. When you approach the building, it's massive. It's massive, and the fact that it's a university, a contemporary university, and that nothing in this institution of higher education is said about that is quite a moment, because you wonder how come this is possible? How come this past and this massive building with people only busy with knowledge, with learning, or actually not addressing that was definitely interesting. And I'm not a pure historian of colonialism. I'm an art historian and I work on African art, but I have made lots of research and I didn't know about this place. So I think it also tells a lot.
Yeah. And maybe let's jump to your essay, which is actually the core essay explaining your personal idea of Congoville. We have multiple interpretations, which is, I think, very enriching. We have the comparison with Putteville by Philippe de Boek. And Nadia Yala also has a very particular explanation on that. But let's look at your quote. Please read it with us and explain why you chose it.
Well, this is 3 sentences that concludes my essay and that really are I think the big questions that I've tried to address in the show and in the essay. When we give up historical awareness towards cities, buildings, and monuments' imperial genesis for the sake of preserving bricks and stones, what are we surrendering morally? When we give up critical resistance and allow detrimental representations to go unchallenged, which part of our city's inhabitants do we choose to exclude and sacrifice? And can we face the reasons why we do so? Yet, as important, how can we transition from this anxiety-ridden and abdicating sort of post-imperial society to the embracing and welcoming kind? So these are, of course, very open questions that ended a long essay talking about, the history of the place and the artists, importantly, the artists participating into the exhibition. But I think what I was trying to make clear with this question is that very often when we, and I am speaking specifically about monuments just because that's what has been so much at the forefront of the discussion for 1 year, but very often people wonder, why is it such a big deal? These are just old stones. Why do we make such a fuss about it? People can consider that it's like noise of certain minority people, but I think that when we actually do that, when we don't face that this is important, we actually say to a whole fringe of the population, to children, that they do not matter compared to old stones. You know, the fact that we keep an old representation of a person that practically no one today knew anything about or would even want to honor, that this person matter more than, let's say, a young black kid growing up in Belgium. And I think it's extremely violent to do that to someone. And then again, and I don't want to, you know, lots of people are bothered with colonial representations. I don't want to say that it's only, you know, black people. A lot of them, that's good news, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of people are not agreeing with the fact that this is still something that we keep in our society. But I think that precisely the lack of education have made that some people have a sort of Pavlovian loyalty that they need to have towards statues that, frankly, they don't know much about or had paid any attention until we actually spoke about them a year ago. So I really wanted, with these questions, I really wanted to make clear the stakes that are present in not only monuments and statues, but really in how to transform society to have a function in society. I mean, it's in everybody's interest to just live in society where everybody feels like they have a place and can function better for everyone's sake. So it was also important for me to end with the fact that nothing is permanent. You know, we totally have the power to change things. I remember when I love to speak about Bas De Ro's work because for me, it's really a wonderful example of imagination, you know, of really taking into your hands, and he was an artist working in extremely difficult conditions in Kinshasa in the 90s, and I love that we can learn lessons from an artist from 1990s Kinshasa to think about our post-colonial cities here. So I think we have no choice but to use our imagination and be able to think something beyond what's in front of your eyes, because that's what we have always done and need to do.
Thank you. Yeah, Aminata, how does that sound to you? What connections do you make?
I really loved these questions, and I really liked that you ended on this note. I enjoyed reading the whole essay. I thought it was. May
I ask why? Because you really seem to be convinced of the.
Because I feel, I don't know, sometimes you read something and you feel like the person that's writing it really gets it, gets what's at stake. And I think for a lot of Black people here, like you say, there is this distance between like academia or how we, how we theorize about things or how we think about things from an academic perspective. And so reading something that is, and on one hand speaks to that audience, but having these little the spirits, I guess, in the text, where you know, like, oh yeah, she really gets it from a person, like she gets it from, she's, you know, like. Personally, it just feels very and I don't know, like my response, because I feel like with the exhibition and I think that is the power of the exhibition as well, is that it encourages a reading of this post-imperial or post-colonial time in Belgium and in Antwerp, as like I was saying, and I'm going following that line of thought, is this haunted period that, but that it demands us to reevaluate the relevance of our recent past in the present, but also for the future, and And I think this insubstantiality of the here and now is very much tied to an acknowledgement of the colonial ghost as a presence, acting on and often meddling with taken for granted realities. We just live it, and it's just like, oh, it's just here. These materialities and these experiences are just, part of what we just need to accept as being different, I guess, and being a minority, I guess. So I guess I think in their haunting, these colonial ghosts demand our attention so that repressed and unresolved social violence in the past, but also very much in the recent presence, can be known, that we not only see it as something that is just past, but that it's very much connected to what the violence that people experience now. And I think this exhibition reveals that beneath the surface of the history we receive, we learn in school and just in media, there lurks this other narrative, which the artists explore, which is very much this untold story that really calls into question the authorized version of events and also what we deem as authorized. So yeah, this concept of hauntology is of interest here because it recognizes that in these ghosts as well, and I think that goes back to where you want to end, the note you want to end on, that in these ghosts lies the possibility as well of a renewed politics, of a politics of memory, of inheritance, and of generations. And heritage is thus, and monuments and all these things we see as heritage is very much bound to the work of hauntology and engaging with ghosts, not just because the ghost of a place shapes so many of our engagements with the past in the present, but because this constant urge to like return and to re-explore and repeat that very much permeates the field of heritage, I think, also leaves open this possibility to just live with ghosts, but justly. And yeah, I think the artists, like what I've seen from the works, these amazing works that they've created, did this great job of enacting or provoking these ghosts that haunt our presence. And by bringing affect and being like that personal aspect and also imagination to these traces of the past, yeah, I think they represent an important mode of thinking here, and I think that, and that's what we can't forget, that it cannot be at the expense of a politicized commitment as well for radical social change. And I think the potential is there in these works to demand that, which has been demanded by people for very, like, I can't even put a time on it, but has this urgency is definitely felt, like Sandrine said, with Black Lives Matter, which really shook us up again to not let it stay too dormant. Mm-hmm.
Do they have the potential that to connect again the things that were divided, the ghosts you talk about?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really, I guess it's the same thing that when you deal with fear that that comes from violence you see and violence you experience, but maybe are not aware that you do experience it as well, that it's really about acknowledging it, and I think it can be very interesting for Black people then, which is the people I'm thinking about most at this point, is to see these works and to see what that does with them, and especially to see works by artists that have similar backgrounds, that look like them, curated by someone that looks like them. And like I said, it doesn't even have to be very explicit, because if you read a text and you read like Sandrine's text and the other essays, you feel that it's not just something that is far away from them.
Yeah.
It's not just something you study and then you write something about it. It's something that is really of importance and heartfelt. Yeah.
Thank you. Bas, do you want to react on the ghosts idea? Are you aware, like when we commissioned this research that you executed for the Middelheimmuseum, do you also feel that there are a lot of...
Yeah, but I think I look at it from a different perspective, because when I studied the history of this place, the history of the Colonial College, I discovered that they had this, they sort of venerated the pioneers, the first colonials that actually went to Congo to bring civilization in the name of Leopold II. And so on this site, there's 3 monuments, and there were plenty of more paintings and statues of these colonial heroes that died in the name of civilization. And if I think about ghosts that haunt this place, it's those people. So the students actually worshipped their own deads. They worshipped them as heroes because they wanted to be like them. They wanted to be like this general who won the war against those Congolese people. So when I think about ghosts that haunt this place, I really think about almost literal ghosts, like the spirit of those first colonials who went to Congo. They're actually here. Because he had these paintings, he had these statues, and they're still here, covered underneath the grass. You can still discover monuments that worship, I don't know how many there are, 80 or 100, and people from Antwerp who died in the name of civilization. So, well, I think it's a very useful concept, and it's a very interesting way of looking at it, but to me, it's sort of, I think about different ghosts, I think.
Because your text is published in the book annotated by 2 Congolese authors, Sorana Muncia and Leonard Pongo. Can you say that they brought to life the ghosts that were haunting your text, or is that...
Not really, because for me, it was a difficult writing process, because everything I was taught while studying history and while doing my PhD was that if you want to understand colonial history, you have to look at both sides. You have to look at different perspectives. You have to take into account the white perspective, but you also have to take into account the Black Congolese perspective. Otherwise, you can never understand how colonialism works, because colonialism is a very complex thing. But then just the scope of the research I did for the Middelheimmuseum was far more limited, because there I had to really zoom in on this very white place. And I only had to look at, or I only could look at the white side of history. So for me, that was counterintuitive in a way. And so therefore I thought, like, at first I thought it was a very good idea to have like Sorana and Leo annotate my text. But I think maybe now in hindsight, I just think that maybe we should have just written the text together. But I only came to realize this very recently. That would have been, I think that's the way forward. Because if it's just like, you're Black, you have your version of history, and you're white, and you have your version of history, then we're getting nowhere. I think it's important to sort of write a news story with different perspectives. I think that's very important. And I don't know, we were just talking about it, about after COVID, how this can also be a place where people meet, that a museum can once again become a place where people meet. I think that's maybe one of the most important things that Middelheim might be able to realize, is that black and white people, people of Congolese descent, people of African descent, and just, I don't know how you would call them, just white Belgians, the regular white Belgians, that they actually meet and they actually might talk. Because I think that's very important, and I think that's the only way, because if everybody's just stuck in its own small island, then well, we're getting nowhere. So,
if you look back at how it is published now, like it's on a spread, you are on the left page, Sorana Leo on the right page. Does it work for you to?
Yeah, it does. And I still think it's a very interesting exercise. And I really like the fact that when you read it together, you do get both perspectives. So I think it's a very good thing. But then I just recently started realizing, like, we should have just written it together. That would have been far more difficult. And I think, and that's probably also, just in general, like having this conversation, having this dialogue is probably very difficult because it's confronting, and especially for the white side. But also, it might hurt to people who are from African descent. So, I don't know. I think having this dialogue, how difficult it might be, is just very important. So I think maybe in hindsight, we should have taken the hardest road, not the way we solve it now. But I do still think that it's a very interesting exercise.
Sandrine, you also had some, how to call that? You had a concern implementing Leonard Pongo and Sorana's Muncia's text together with Bas. Now that it's ready, how do you feel about?
Initially, my concerns were that I don't want to reify, a white opinion and a black opinion. As I said, I think you don't need to be of African descent to be bothered by the idea of colonialism. And so, by conceiving of the project like that, that was the first fear that I had. I don't think it falls into that trap, so be assured. And also, I think that's something that we have worked on this exhibition. There's, being of African descent, being African is not just being in reaction against something. And that's something that very often bothers me in the way all this discussion about post-colonialism are presented, is that we expect from people of African descent to be reacting against, they exist outside of this. And so these were my fears. Now that the text is here, and I agree with you, writing it together would have been a wonderful idea and probably much more difficult, but that's precisely in the difficulty that resides the work, that we all need to do so. But what I thought was really interesting with the way it is now is that it still allows for this dialogue, and it's interesting to see. I was rereading it for a conversation, and I really see a sort of it's like the voices are threading themselves into your text, and it works well. I feel like the essay of Bas, I see voices being weaved into the texture of your text, and I think it's definitely a first step into what you were saying of trying to work collaboratively. And so for me, it was an extremely interesting attempt and very experience in how we can collaborate, because we have to come up with ideas to be able to do these sort of things. And that's how I really see it as a success, as something that works and that can be a first experiment towards other ways of writing, other ways of collaborating. And it's also visually very beautiful, I think, which as an art historian does not leave me.
Aminata, do you have something to add regarding this triple voiced part?
Yeah, I think what I like about it is that I like the way like Sorana and Leona decided to approach this, because I don't feel like it's like Sandrine said, it doesn't feel reactionary, and I feel like if I want to, I can just read them separately as well, because I agree that I think it's very important that we have dialogue and that we have things where we work together. And I think it would have been interesting, for example, if the three of you had written it together. But on the other hand, I also think it's very important for Black people to have the opportunity to write their own things from their own perspective. And especially because yeah, there is a bit of this irony. I feel it very much because I'm also a historian, and if you have historical research about an institute, colonial institute, where people were basically, trained to go to the colonies, and I think a lot of times, and I think that's very sad, I think a lot of times Black people feel like history about research about colonialism is something that is done by white people, which is still very colonial, I guess. And so I felt like when I looked at it as well visually as just reading it, I like the fact that Sorana and Leonard's piece could stand on its own, as well as blend and add something to Bas' text, as well as Bas' text adding something to. So I did like how they work together, and I think the fact that it's the way it's done now and what you have as a result now. Maybe sparks this interest of doing research in different ways. Where Bas is now saying, like, now that after these 3 years, maybe this is how we could have done it. I think that is something great to take away from this, that we don't hold fast hold strong so much to this idea of this is how we do research, because I guess we're taught
to keep it open.
Yeah.
The next jump we're going to make is to one ghost that Bas discovered, the lecture that was given in this room, probably. We don't know for sure, but let's think it happened here. I'm talking about the lecture of Leopold Senghor. Sandrine, it was your idea to contact Nadia Yala Kisikudi. Why did you choose her? Why did you want to contact her to talk about the text?
Well, Yala is a specialist, she's a philosopher. She's a specialist of African philosophy, so I couldn't think of a better person to talk about Leopold Senghor, who is one of the biggest African philosopher in history so far. So it really was the obvious choice to me. And it's interesting, and again, I think because she has really that background, she saw in that text things that I did not see when I read it, and I was really, it was really interesting to see her perspective on this text and on other speech that Leopold Senghor had given. And what I really liked about it is that it shows the seeds of, dissidence, of things. Very often we look at colonialism as this square system working, and actually when you study it from up close, you see all the incoherences. Something that's also true with your essay, Bas. I remember when I read your text, I was struck by the number of colonial administrator trained here, sent to the Congo and failing, coming back very quickly. There was a large number of people for whom it did not work. And so for me, it was very interesting because it really spoke to the fact that what was being taught here did not stand the test of reality. And I think that's very often. And so it's true for many different things. An imperial mind actually did not stand the test of the reality of the Congo. Same thing for racism. When you actually speak with people, it does not stand the stand of reality. And so it was a very important lesson. And when you read Yala's text about Senghor, and it's interesting because Senghor goes through phase of great critique and then rehabilitation. It's really been that way ever since, because, and according to the state of society, people look back at his work or they just reject it entirely, because especially in this text, he speaks about métissage, about a mixed culture, about he has this neologism of, the Belgian Negro that he speaks about. I think that what he's getting at, and I think that what Yala is trying to say is really a sort of ability to live together at some point. Maybe he did not picture yet the sort of, Congolese or African presence that we have nowadays in Belgium, but he was at least working through ways of living together and trying in his own way to go against colonialism. You know, when he opened his take by talking about the failure of Belgian colonialism, and he comes up with the fact that people here did not learn African languages, I believe, or were not interested into what he called the Negro poetics or something like that. I think that really what he was getting at is that the humanity of people, and that it was not just the failure of Belgian colonialism, it was the failure of colonialism as a concept, period. And yeah, so I think we can go back to Senghor, and of course, you know, we can critique him, but I think that he had at least the audacity of trying to think about a way of living together. And these days, we know, especially after last spring, after BLM, I live in the US most of the time. We live in an extremely polarized time, and I understand that sometimes this sort of voice fell flat because people are not ready to listen to this sort of thought at a certain point in time. But, you know, we have actually no choice but at some point sitting down and thinking about how we are going to live together. And so that's really what I think was interesting in Yala's text about Senghor here.
Very true. It's interesting how she is mild for Senghor. You can be very harsh with him, but she tries to...
He's probably going through this phase.
Yeah, yeah. Aminata, we couldn't get a quote from Yala so far, so we asked you to choose one. Yeah. Can you share it with us?
Well, first of all, it was not easy to choose one. I had I had a PDF version and it was printed, and I had marks everywhere in her text. I thought it was. I think she writes very beautifully, and there's a lot of quotes that I'm going to keep for myself as well. So, I tried to think of quotes that were a bit in line with my thought process, and what I found interesting with how then the book is structured, and I don't know if this is maybe a happy accident, but at the end of Philippe de Boek's essay, he comments on our complex colonial history, saying that, and I quote him here, quote, its specters starkly continue to haunt us, unquote. And then Nadia Yala aptly starts her essay with the following sentence, quote, Congoville is a subterranean city haunting every town in the Kingdom of Belgium, be they French-speaking or Flemish-speaking, unquote. She then says that, quote, the arrogance of those demanding that murder be forgotten gives rise to the raging memory of those who still remember. For memory forges political communities. It invokes ghosts, but it also supports living, militant practices against the institutionalization of oblivion, unquote. And so I selected 3 quotes, but just she then ends her piece with this, I think, very powerful statement, quote, Congoville is a memory city, but it is not a cemetery. It teaches us that the past is alive and that it commands the future to appear. The dead, the ghosts, the spirits, the lost souls haunting the buildings, the parks, the monuments of former imperial cities torment the consciousness of the living, with whom they enjoy ties of kinship. The latter, the possessed, imperatively demand accountability in order to open a door, a path, a breach in the sturdiness of the concrete. so I just think like this appearance of ghosts, and I think this is very much individual, because everyone sees different ghosts depending on their own past, their own story. But I think this appearance of ghosts represents above all a claim upon us, an insistence that we all acknowledge the role we play in present injustices. And ghosts notify us of our involvement, and they make sure that we do something about that involvement. I think that is very important, and I think it's also what I liked in the artist talk with Pelagie, where that's also what she hopes, that we do something, that it activates us. So yeah, ghosts allude to the presence of that which has been excluded, which has just been excluded from our knowledge, but also what has been marginalized, and who has been marginalized, and who has been expelled. And I think Nadia Yala's contribution and as well as the other contributions actually remind us yet again that it is only by living with, talking with, and accommodating our ghosts, our common ghosts, that we might learn to live in these post, colonial times. So yeah.
It's also something that you read in the piece of Philippe de Boek, the last author.
Yeah.
His idea is also that we're stuck in this loaded situation where we are encountering each other, where we're entangled with each other. Let's end with the last quote of him. Bas, can you read him, please?
Congolese artists' attempt at offering suturing possibilities in order to design alternative futures always necessitates a return to the foreign country that is the past, and certainly the past of this complex colonial history.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm also thinking of artists like Philippe, who has a great practice in collaborating with artists who can make us see the ghosts that are there and make us try to understand their language. How can we embrace them? How can we engage with them? Is that also something that you recognize, Aminata?
Yeah, I think it's important to know that, like, to remember, we have to imagine, and that's what I like about how the artists in the exhibition engage with this indeterminate relation between the here and the then and now, the present and the absent, the being and the non-being. And as such, they are having this ongoing conversation that we are having here as well with the ghosts of the past, with the aim of then inventing a different future rather than fixing the past. We can't fix the past, but yeah, haunting is something that belongs to the structure of any hegemony, and I think in their works, they really reveal these absent presences of the there, then, here, now, and the effects of the past, the present, but also the future on people's lives, but also on our environment, the place where we live and hope to live together peacefully and justly. Yeah.
I couldn't say that better. Sandrine, would you like to end? I would like to give the final word to you. Is there something to add to the multiple ghosts that we have?
Yes. No, it's a wonderful feeling to see artists and authors, to accept these ideas and then to give a life to it on their own, and it's extremely rewarding to see people taking these ideas in their own direction and thinking about it. It's really a wonderful sensation, and when the exhibition opens, it can actually continue into the population and continue its life and becoming a tool for conversation. I would be more than happy.
Thank you very much. Thank you, panel, for the enriching contributions and in the book and here today. The book is for sale in the museum shop. It is published together with Leuven University Press, and I warmly invite you to dive into it. Thank you.